Can Korea compete in the new space market? That and more on Korea Technology Weekly. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. J.R. Reagan. In this episode, we'll be discussing South Korea's aims for an era of private companies launching orbital space programs and expanding the space industry. South Korea's Science Ministry announced recently that it will inject 211 billion Korean won, which is about 170 million US dollars, into space research to help the nation's space industry produce key parts of launch vehicles and satellites. The Ministry of Science and ICT's Space Pioneer Research Project passed a feasibility study in 2020 and subsequently approved the investment of an additional 211 billion won from 2021 to 2030. The ministry will provide 58 billion won in the launch vehicle area and 137 billion won in the satellite area. South Korea has been importing a lot of parts and components when producing launch vehicles and satellites, and there has not been a lot of investment in recent years. When the nation made a multi-purpose satellite in 2012, 64% of the parts were domestically produced, while the rest were procured from other nations. In the current satellite development project, 65% of parts are domestically produced. The nation's long-term reliance on imported parts has been a major reason that the projects required longer periods of time and larger budgets. South Korea spent around 650 billion Korean won, which is about 560 million US dollars, on space development projects in 2020, as the country gears up to launch its first domestically built rocket and next-generation satellites. The investment is a 6.4% increase from 2019, with the earmarked budget to be focused on building up the country's capability to use space more effectively and bolster related industries, according to the Ministry of Science and ICT. Part of the budget set aside is to conduct final tests and assemble a flight model of the Nuri launch vehicle that will be sent into orbit in 2021. The three-stage vehicle uses the 75-ton thrust rocket engine designed and produced in the country, along with the smaller 7-ton engine. Some 318 billion Korean won was also spent on a new medium-sized satellite that was blasted off in the second half of 2020, as well as the development of so-called Constellation Satellite Project and 2 Korea Multipurpose Satellites, or COMPSAT. The medium satellite weighs some 500 kilograms and will be used in disaster response and the observation of farmlands, fisheries, and urban development projects. The 2 new COMSATs will augment 3 that are already in orbit, with greater emphasis placed on better observational capabilities and sensors that can enhance services for users. One of the multi-purpose satellites will be launched in 2021. South Korea has also completed detailed design work of its lunar orbital probe in 2020 and plans to take part in the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, Commercial Lunar Payload Service Project. Satellites are also an important next step for global air quality monitoring. South Korea has successfully launched its satellite in 2020. It is the first in the network of 3 that will eventually provide coverage for Asia, North America, and Europe. Aboard the Korean Aerospace Research Institute's Choleon-2B satellite is South Korea's Geostationary Environment Monitoring Spectrometer, or GEMS instrument. GEMS is designed to improve early warnings for dangerous pollution events across the Asia-Pacific region and monitor long-term climate change. Over its 10-year mission, GEMS will investigate chemical concentrations critical to air quality and climate change, such as nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, formaldehyde, ozone, and other aerosols. It is expected to identify the source of fine dust, PM 2.5, flowing into Korea by observing fine dust and fine dust-inducing substances in East Asia for the first time. The development of Choleon-2B has enabled Korea to participate in the global environmental surveillance system in a leading position, along with the U.S. and Europe, and help Korea play a major role in global environmental monitoring and disaster response. The GEM's mission will enable Korean scientists to assess and forecast air quality, monitor regional transboundary pollution and Asian dust, and understand the long-term effect of aerosols in climate change. This information will help reduce economic loss by improving climate change predictions. Providing early warning of natural disasters and pollution events will also help save lives. GEMS will monitor atmospheric gases over Asia hourly during daytime from a geostationary or fixed orbit of 35,786 kilometers above the equator. It marks a significant leap forward in scientists' ability to monitor air pollution from space. GEMS can perform a 5,000-kilometer east-west scan in less than 30 minutes and will collect images of required geographical locations at least 8 times a day. As a sister instrument to NASA's Tropospheric Emissions Monitoring of Pollution or TEMPO program, GEMS will be the first satellite instrument in a constellation of 3 that will revolutionize the way scientists observe air quality over significant areas of the Northern Hemisphere. GEMS is nearly identical to TEMPO, which is scheduled to launch into geostationary orbit in 2022. TEMPO will make hourly daytime measurements of air quality over North America. The European Space Agency's Sentinel-4, currently in development, will observe air quality over Europe. All 3 instruments will provide data products that will improve scientists' ability to understand and forecast air quality around the Northern Hemisphere. Cholion 2B will also be used for the protection of the marine environment, management of water resources, and marine safety by observing marine pollutants such as green algae, red tide, and oil spills in the waters around the Korean Peninsula. The small satellite market has also been rapidly growing with the demand for broadband, TV, and Earth observation services, attracting large amounts of venture capital investments globally. The small satellite launch market, however, is in a supply and demand imbalance, with an average wait time of 1 year. Launches of small satellites weighing up to 600 kilograms topped 1,000 last year compared to 1,700 made over the previous 7 years between 2012 and 2019. The global small satellite launch market is projected to report over a tenfold increase from 3 trillion Korean won last year to 37 trillion won by 2027. Hanwha Aerospace, a major aerospace company in South Korea, announced recently that it will acquire a stake in Satrec Initiative, a small satellite company in Korea. It plans to invest about 109 billion Korean won within the first half of 2021 to secure a 30% stake. Satrec Initiative is the first company in Korea specializing in satellites. It was established in 1999 by researchers from KAIST University's Satellite Research Center in Daejeon, South Korea, who had participated in developing Korea's first satellite, KitSat-1. The company started with 25 employees and now has over 400. The company is the only company in Korea to directly develop and manufacture core satellite components, such as satellite bodies, ground systems, and electronic optical payloads. The company has exported satellites to Malaysia, Singapore, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and Spain. But the space market is also being pursued by other companies in South Korea as well. South Korea's InnoSpace, which develops launch systems to carry small satellites into space, is set to complete its Series A funding round of 8 billion won, or $7.3 million, participated in by domestic venture capital and strategic investors. The fundraising comes after it received pre-Series A funding in 2019, reflecting the rapid growth in the small satellite market for commercial and scientific use in South Korea. Founded in 2017, InnoSpace develops launch vehicles for satellites weighing up to 600 kilograms. Investors focused on its technology and the market growth of small satellites, which have been driving space industry growth across the globe. InnoSpace's core technology lies in its hybrid rocket motors composed of solid fuel and liquid fuel oxidizers. Additionally, the Korean startup has developed small research rockets and is supplying them to defense service companies and government agencies in South Korea. It is now concentrating on developing rocket engines for nanosatellites weighing up to 50 kilograms to place them into low Earth orbit at an altitude of at least 500 kilometers. If InnoSpace succeeds in its test launches, the venture firm will then make its foray into 150 kilogram microsatellites and 500 kilogram mini satellites. Ultimately, Korea envisions launching several small satellites into low Earth orbit and connecting them with existing medium and large satellites to improve communication speeds, which will help establish next-generation mobile networks as well as allow more accurate weather forecasting, disaster prevention, and surveillance patrol. It will also enable satellite services for the Internet of Things, autonomous driving, and sixth generation or 6G telecommunications. Even as a relative latecomer, Korea has significantly ramped up its space ambitions to be a major player in this new market. Will it succeed in the global space race? The sky's the limit. That's all for this week's show. Follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Idea Explorer or my website ideaexplorer.com. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions about the show and tune in next week for more news and trends about Korea technology.